Welcome to Blue Glasses Math. In this podcast, we will explore how our self-perception as math teachers and learners influences our approach to life. Whether you identify as a math enthusiast or not, this podcast is for you. Are you a teacher, a parent, a school administrator, or a student? Join me as we shift our perspective on what it means to be a math person. Let's take a look. Well, hello. I have Mike Flynn and Zach Champagne here today on the podcast. So thrilled to have the two of you. Thank you so much for joining me. And you guys are the second duo that I've had on the podcast. So it's a lot of fun to have this conversation with two of you and come to this space, because I always say I bring people to this podcast who are out there in the world doing amazing things with math education for teachers and for students. And also just, you both have such a great spirit. So thank you so much and welcome to the podcast.
We appreciate the invitation.
Yeah,
thanks for having us, Pam.
Yeah,
good to be here.
Of course. Yeah, and Zach, you've been on the podcast before as a solo guest. And I just wanted to start by asking, I start with a question to my guests about what brought you to this space, and how did your perspective on what it means to do math, how has that shifted over the years? You know, a lot of teachers come to the space of, and I'm talking about mostly elementary, I work with a lot of elementary school teachers, come to the space of math class kind of with certain beliefs that they bring. And I'm just kind of curious how your beliefs may have shifted over the years, and what are some of the things that made those beliefs shift?
Well, I'll jump, I guess. My history with math, I actually never really liked it as a student, and I didn't really feel very confident in it. I mean, I got okay grades, but it was like super boring for me. It just very disconnected from like meaning, I guess. And when I became a teacher, I also didn't like to teach. It was my least favorite subject to teach. I was more of a science and ELA guy. And so by luck, across the hall from me was a teacher named Anne-Marie O'Reilly, who was a trainer. She trained people in the summer in how to use the investigations math curriculum, and she had connections to Mount Holyoke College and all the professional learning they did there. And she always subtly tried to like persuade me to pursue some math professional learning, and I, again, wasn't interested in that. And there was an opportunity that came up to be a field test teacher for the revised version of investigations, and she says, you know, we'd love to have you be part of it. And I'm like, hard pass. And she said, well, there's a stipend, like a $2,000 stipend. And I'm like, I'm in, right? New teacher, you're broke. And so that actually was the start, because I was so, I guess, nervous about math. I didn't have a lot of confidence, and so anything to do with math professional learning scared me. And the money was an incentive to try this, but part of this project was you had to do monthly ongoing professional learning. But the people that we were actually working with were like all the big leaders in math education. I had no idea who any of them were. So thankfully, because I would have been way more intimidated if I had known all the folks that were leading it. But what I found very quickly was I was now in a group of amazing educators that were all learners and that were all open and created spaces where you could take risks and you could explore math in a way that made sense to you. And shortly into that work, I turned to someone during one of the sessions and said, if I had learned math this way, it would have changed everything for me. And so from that moment on, it changed not only my perception of math and myself as a math learner, but it changed how I approach math with my students. So there was a huge belief system shift that happened for me. I went from believing that I wasn't good at math and that math just had to be explained to kids because that's all I knew, to like you could engage in math thinking and make connections when given these like right opportunities and the right tools and the right community. And so then I worked really hard to build that with my students. And then over the years, I got more confidence and then started to build that with teachers and then shared what I've learned. And it's brought me to where I am today. So very thankful for Anne-Marie and that $2,000.
Right?
I need a little incentive to get in there.
I love that. That's awesome. Yeah. And I love what you were saying, Mike, about the creating spaces, which I know we're going to get into a little bit more, but I think a lot of what you're talking about is not just the doing the math as a teacher, but also with the community of people who you're with. And so
Absolutely.
That's so important. I love it. Zach, your turn. You're up.
So Pam, I just want to acknowledge one thing that you mentioned, that this is my second time on the podcast and Mike's
Yes.
first. So we're just going to let that be a theme here, that our competitive spirit here is going to like make me one up Mike in this moment. I don't get to do it very often, so today's my day. If you want to go back and hear an eerily familiar story to what Mike just told, So much so that investigations is part of it as well. You can go back to the earlier episode I was on and hear that story. I'll tell a slightly different story today about a moment that shifted things for me that wasn't in the beginning, because Mike and I's stories are eerily familiar in so many ways. But I'm going to talk about my wife and colleague Claire Riddell. It was about halfway through my career, and she and I were working on this project at Florida State University, working with like our youngest learners, like how kids from ages 3 to 8 come to understand math. And she was a primary educator, and my background was in like grades 4, 5, and 6, and I thought I was like really important because I did the bigger math.
Big kids?
And
Yeah, the big kids.
Yeah, boy was I wrong, right? But anyway, Claire really shifted my thinking to understand and respect and come to really be like fascinated and like just deeply into the primary grades. And so in 2019, 2020, it's the year I returned to the classroom after being out of the classroom for about 8 years. And I returned to a first and second grade classroom based on like what I got to learn alongside her. And so that was a big shift in my career, to really be around 6 and 7 year olds all day. And boy, is that work incredibly complex and demanding. So that was a big moment for me and a shift in my career to move from like the upper elementary, early middle school grades to those primary grades. And I have stuck around there a lot in this part of my career and been really into that.
And okay, so tell maybe my next question would be, so when you went to this younger age students, did you notice anything about the math? Obviously the math it's like, I don't want to say it's different. It's not different, but a lot of times at those early grades, the focus is so much on literacy, which is very important, very important. And how did you see the development of mathematical ideas from that younger grade, from those younger students? Because it is a demanding time. Those
Yeah.
all those 6 and 7 year olds running around the classroom.
Probably
Yeah.
wants to add something here as well, because he's had a lot of work in the primary grades. But I would say that the mathematics is equally as complex and demanding as the mathematics in third through fourth grade and in middle school and in high school. The way that the stuff that young people are learning is incredibly complex. And I would argue that that work is more cognitively demanding on a teacher, because you have to like in the moment like listen to what a young person is saying, and they don't talk about math the way that we talk about math a lot of times, and you have to then think in that moment like, what's the next question I'm going to ask them that's like mathematically correct in a language that they understand and isn't going to turn off the other like 30 kids in the classroom, whatever it is. Like that work is really cognitively demanding on teachers.
Yeah.
And I came to that space as someone who had a lot of experience in math education and had to learn a lot about how to teach literacy. So that was a whole other world. But I would say the work of primary teachers is more cognitively demanding than it was for me in other grades. I don't know, Mike, if you have other things to say about that or not, but
Yeah.
I mean, everything you said is spot on, and I think the other thing too is that you always have that range of learners too. You have students that are already doing operations. Some kids are even like, I taught second grade for years, so I had kids had a lot of multiplicative thinking, and then I had other kids that like couldn't really count past like in the 20s and 30s, and give all the kinds of rich experiences that everyone needs, because it's all about building that number sense in those early grades. And so, yeah, your mind's just in a million different places because you're trying to meet the needs of each of the learners so that they can all develop that rich understanding that will then be the foundation that we build upon later on. But it's also the most exciting time too, because just like early literacy, where you see kids go from a non-reader to like being able to read these books, and they you just see that it's like they break the code. That's, I remember in those when we were teaching reading. So once they broke the code, now they've unlocked it. But we see that same thing in math. And so when you see kids make these really big leaps, these big connections, it's incredible. So I feel like as kids get older, you don't get to see those really powerful, amazing leaps. They're not as big, I guess. They're as exciting, maybe. I don't know. Maybe I'm not using the right word, but there's just so many big milestones that happen in those early grades that I think when you get in the other grades, the upper grades, they don't seem as significant as they do with like a 5-year, 6-year-old.
Yeah. I love this. And, talking about the process of learning and so Mike, both of you were talking about, the content, I think, right? It's the content building and the cognitive demand. You mentioned, Zach, about how hard it is how difficult it can be for a teacher at that with those younger grade levels to kind of keep up with all of and then tying into what you were saying, Mike, all of the different levels that everybody's coming into at that age. It's like I'm picturing like a popcorn, like some are popping earlier than others, and the other ones are still sizzling. But they're going to pop, right? They're going to get there, and it's just that patience that teachers need to employ at those early grades is so. I don't know. It's hitting me really hard right now, and you both were talking. Yeah.
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 Patience and trust, right? You have to trust the process. And that was the thing I struggled with early on before I did all that training and kind of broke free, is like I didn't trust that kids would make these leaps without me telling them, right? That just do this thing. That was like, if I didn't explain it to them, how would they ever get it? And then as you begin to build that trust in the process, and that knowing that when you give kids the right experiences and the right tools, and in that culture that supports the risk-taking and discourse and all of that, that these big, gigantic moments of understanding happen. And once you begin to trust that process, then it gets reinforced, because then you start to see that success and you realize, okay, I'm on the right path here. This is the way I should be running my math class.
So trust. So trusting not just the process of what the kids are going to do, but I think there's also this element of teachers trusting themselves, right?
Yeah.
Teachers trusting themselves to not be the teller all the time, right? And I think that you hit me with the trusting the process, because it's about the teachers too, right? So let's go there next. So I know that the two of you work together, and I want to hear, because I know you both work with teachers now, right? You're a teacher, so you're both out of the classroom providing professional learning for teachers. And you have this amazing project that you're working on right now, or this new, is it kind of a new venture? I'm not sure. I don't know how long and it's called, we've got Friends of Flynn, right? And Math Playdates. Yeah.
Nailed it. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I'm a huge believer that teachers need so much support, not because they don't know, but because it's like you said earlier, it's cognitively demanding. It is difficult, and it's difficult to learn to trust ourselves. So teachers need support to be able to get there. And I think that you are both providing this amazing service for teachers, and I want to talk about it because it's hugely inspiring to me. Yeah. So let's go there next. Tell me about it.
Hey, you want to kick us off, talk about the company a little bit, and then maybe I can jump in later on the collaborative? Does that sound okay?
Yeah. For sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things, like after I left the classroom, I went and worked in higher education for about 10 years. And which was really good, is I got to work for the program. I ran the program that actually I was getting all my professional learning from after we moved on from that field test project. So
Cool.
it's just kind of one thing leads to another, right? And so I got to do that for 10 years. But in part of that work, we were trying to get a lot of access for people to take these courses when we were at the college, and online was the direction people were going. So one big part of my job was to try to figure out, how do you take really enriching professional learning that involves collaboration and having that safe collaborative space where you can do risk taking and you can build off one another's ideas and get different perspectives. All of that rich interaction was really critical to that work. But how do you make that work online? And at the time, this is back in 2012, online learning was like, it left a lot to be desired.
Yeah.
But there was a startup company called Zoom at the time, and we're quite familiar with them now, right? But I got this idea and I reached out to them and said, do you think we could use this platform for education? Could we have people in person and people online do this live interaction? And so we began this experiment, and we found a way to connect people. And the first year we did it, we had people on campus, but then we had people streaming in from Africa and from Europe and from all over the United States, and it actually worked. And this was way before they had breakout rooms and everything. So we started to refine the process, and I brought Zach on board as staff, and Sarah, and then Stephanie. So these are all people who work for my company now. And over the years, we refined that process. And I've always been interested in, and my team as a result too, because they work with me, has been interested in, how do you engage people in this space? Because we're always trying to think about, where do people want to learn? Like, what's the future for professional learning? And when you talk to teachers, people are really interested in flexibility. They want to be people enjoy professional learning, but giving up your afternoons or a week of your summer or evenings, it gets hard. You have family and you have friends and your work and all of these other things. So we have been really focused on, what are the different ways that we could recreate those engaging experiences in live formats, and then we kind of lock that in, figure that out. So now what we've done as a company is we're trying to figure out, how do we do that in a more video-based, self-paced format? Can we create that same kind of connectivity you get? And that started sort of the big thing that we've been doing. So we still work with districts. We still go in, and I still teach preschool through high school and collaborate with teachers in their schools. But a big thing that we've been working on for the last few years is building out these courses that are all the same kind of courses that changed who I was as a teacher, but making them work where you could actually take it completely self-paced, and it feels like you're working right with a cohort, like you've got, because we've recorded teachers who are interacting with that math, but breaking the fourth wall, talking to the camera, inviting you into the work so that you can work in parallel, and that they're pushing your thinking, and the math is really engaging, you're building good connections, but you've got all these other ideas from other colleagues who are sharing their thinking. And then if you want to also do that work with a partner, you could have you and your partner can work together live, and you still have that other community online that you're working with. And it's all done through like really high-end video production. So that's been something that's really exciting for us. And Zach, actually, we were trying to think about, like, this is so different than like asynchronous learning and things. So we were trying to figure out what would be a name that would work. And Zach found it. So if you want to just announce the name too, Zach, it's
Yeah.
but it really clicks. It really works.
Yeah, so we call it intersynchronous learning. It's a neat word that's between
Intra.
Yeah.
Inter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Involving
somewhere-
all the forms of synchronous learning.
Interesting.
So, because the idea is like we want it so that you could take it if you were by yourself, but you also you could take it with a small group. You could take it as a school. It could be facilitated. It could be, you could do some together, some independently, and we realize it provides that maximum amount of flexibility. But the thing that we've heard from everyone who's been taking this is they say it feels like I'm sitting right there. Feel like I do the math and I think I'm done, and then I hear that teacher on the video, and she's thought about it so differently. I had to go back and rethink my work, and so we're excited. We kind of found a way to do that, and so that's sort of been our focus. And we continue to build these courses. We offer them. We've got them for every domain in mathematics, which is really great. It builds teachers' content knowledge and pedagogical knowledge. And then we got this idea of, we still know that people like live connections. And so I'm going to pass it to Zach to talk about this other part of the company, what we're doing now, to also build this community that's also really important.
Yeah. So at the same time all of this is happening over the past few years, our community that we previously had found on Twitter was sort of just like, for lack of a better way to say it, falling apart, right? We were, people were rightfully frustrated with that platform, as am I, and I know Mike is as well, and trying to figure out like, where do we go now? And so we're sort of like trying to think about like what our new community could be, how could that be? And we're not proposing that have Twitter. That's not what we're trying to do here. But one lane we felt we could fill with that was through what we call like a monthly or just a collaborative where folks can join monthly or annually. But the collaborative itself does include the first course that Mike talked about of the 8 called Unleashing the Power of the Number System. So all of our collaborative members get access to this 8-week course, maybe 16 to 20 hours of professional development that they can take as a member whenever they want to do it and get to experience a real intersynchronous learning experience. I said experience twice, but
That's
you're
okay.
with me.
I'm with you.
And then we also had created some within that collaborative. There are mini courses. So Mike and I every month are releasing a mini course. It's like 2 to 3 hours worth of work that is also intersynchronous. So it includes some of those components, but it's a smaller chunk that you don't have to bite off as much. But the collaborative itself also includes live events, office hours, blog posts. We're doing all this stuff to put out for members. But the one that I think Pam, you and I and Mike have connected on the most are our math playdates.
So fun.
Which we started these internally in the company, where our team would get together and we would just pose a math problem to each other and spend 45 minutes, an hour playing with the math problem. And so we had so much fun with those that we decided we wanted to launch those as an opportunity for our members. And so every month there's a math play date where one member of our team is the problem poser, and they bring a problem to the table that no one on our team has seen either. So we all come in as learners as well with the collaborative, and they pose a problem, and we go out into breakout rooms and you work with 3 to 4 people on the problem. We come back about 15, 20 minutes later and we just share ideas.
Yeah.
We delay the gratification that some people get from answers, but we delay the need to like focus on answers and just talk about ideas, representation, strategies, thought process, all that, honoring that we think that's the most interesting part of the work, right? The answer sometimes is like the least interesting part of what we do.
Yeah.
So those are the math play dates. They're just one component of the collaborative, but they are so much fun. And we have the best time with those, just getting down to play with some math together.
Yeah. I love that. And I love that you're talking about this sort of like this delay of focusing on the answer or that final outcome, right? That I feel like math class provides an opportunity for us to learn to be able to sit in that delay of gratification that ties into what you were saying earlier about trusting the process, right? Trusting the process of your students. And so can you give an example maybe of problem that you might have done on a math playdate to give our listeners like an insight, or like what types of problems they might be? I'll just pose one for example. Is it like 12 times 24 and how did you get it? Or is it more something different than that?
There's a few ranges. So each of us actually we'll either create or we'll find ones that are like very like publicly available that are interesting that we haven't worked through. One of the ones, like one category of tasks that Zach and I are kind of playing around with like how to name them, but I think we kind of land on like the immersive story problem. And so an example I'll give is like the task I created is about a zombie outbreak, and you actually get to see how the germ, the virus or whatever starts to spread, and then there's this experimental cure that also multiplies when it's injected into a patient that has this infection, and you can see how that spreads. But there's actually, it's done with video production. So when you get the slide deck here, like we present it live when we're with the group, but it also works completely on your own. And there's like a TV and you click on it and it actually plays like this breaking news and it gives you all that information. And then there's this time limit. Like you have to figure out, is this going to work, or is this patient that is the experimental patient going to change into a zombie? So you're like fully like in it, and everything. We even take the time to like get all like the graphics and things so that it feels in some ways like an escape room. It's not like escape room, but you know, when you go in there, you're sort of in character almost. Everything
Yes.
kind of is like in that space. We kind of were like, we've done that as well. So that's one kind of category of problems. And Zach, we have some other ones too, right?
Yeah. We maybe we would call them, like, I'm sure there's better names for it, but like non-routine, non-curricular tasks. These aren't things that the answer is going to jump out instantly to you. Again, because the answer is, I think, the least important part of these, the immersive part of these things. And so we try to look for things that would be something that teachers would, the answer wouldn't jump off the page, that you've got to think a little bit. We also really try to find tasks that have multiple points of entry, right? We want folks to be able to just to try something, right?
Yeah.
Because our math play dates, we have teachers from, pre-K through 8th, sometimes even secondary folks come in there with us as well. And we want to make sure that they have a vehicle in that, like, you couldn't look at Mike's zombie task and while there might be a formula at some point, there's not a formula that jumps off the page that says, oh, I know I can just plug this in and figure out the answer to this, right? You've got to try something. And so the other thing we do with these that's been fun is, like, normally for our live events, we release a recording to our members. So if you can't join live, you can watch an edited version of the recording. We clean them up and take out some of the downtime in there maybe.
Sure.
But for the play dates, we actually record a debrief. So what'll happen is we don't record them live because we want people to be able to be vulnerable and they're not thinking and not feel like, oh, I'm being recorded. So within the next couple of days, 2 members of our team will get together and do like an 8 to 10 minute debrief of the strategies and representations and the things that we saw that came up during the live play date. And then that's what gets released to our collaborative, is like kind of like an overview of 3 to 4 different strategies or representations that we saw from members or from ourselves that we may have used to kind of like wrap up what that is. So it's a really cool experience to go through from start to finish, I think.
So the team does the debrief, not the people who are necessarily in the play date. That's really cool. And I love that you kind of hold back and provide that patience, that time to pause.
Yeah, because we realize, like, on some levels it'd be fun to have like the whole group to be able to share, but when you record, it just changes the dynamic. And when you're asking people to be vulnerable, take risks, a lot of the math that we're doing, because there's non-curricular, there isn't like they're experimenting. They're trying different strategies because there's not an obvious like one way to solve this problem. And when you have that record button on, and it doesn't, people might hold back a little bit. So we want people to really be able to bring all their learning, all their vulnerabilities, everything to that space. And then by having us just do the debrief, we can do something pretty condensed, really well produced. And that way people can watch this short version of like the recap so that they can do the math on their own and then get enough to feel satisfied. But we always leave those debriefs also with some other questions, right? Because the learning never really is, we're not trying to button it up. Like, okay, now you got the right answer, pat yourself on the back. It's like, so we discovered this, but now I'm wondering this. And then we pass it off to them to keep thinking about.
Yeah. And it seems like trust is a theme in this conversation here. You guys talked about trusting teachers and trusting the process. I think what this does, at least for the adults we're working with, is it communicates trust. It's also important that we communicate that we trust kids, right? And in this case, we're trusting the learners in the room to go explore the math and to play with the math. And like we also say that, like, you know, when we do somewhat of a debrief with the whole group, but like obviously we don't hear from everyone, and we also, even though we didn't hear your voice, we're trusting that you learned something today. One of my favorite quotes from Jenny Bay Williams, she said once, is that you don't have to finish a math problem to learn something from it. I think that's really important, that like learning is happening, even though we leave these unfinished at times. And at the same time, we don't hear from everyone, but we're trusting the human beings in the room to engage in the math where they are. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And before you wrapped that up a little bit, Zach, I was thinking about all of the words that have come out in this conversation: vulnerability, patience, trust, all of these human virtues. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the book. It's called Math for Human Flourishing by Francis Su. It's one of my favorites. And he talks in there about how math is the place where we can develop these human virtues if we give it the chance. And it sounds like in these math play dates and in your collective and in all the work that you're doing, that's really what you're getting at, is that human aspect of doing math. And I just am in awe of how you're bringing this to teachers so that they can also feel what it feels like to sit in that seat of the problem solver, so that then they can bring that authenticity, is not the word I'm looking for, that humility, that vulnerability, understanding that this is exactly what the kiddos are going through, and to give the space and the time in the process and trusting themselves and their kids and their students is really amazing. Awesome. Okay, so I just want to wrap this up real quick because I have a very curious question. How did you guys meet? Because I know you're not geographically from the same place, but you're both primary educators, primary grades educators, and then now you're working together more closely, and I'm just curious how you met. And I'm going to guess it was at an NCTM conference, but I could be totally wrong.
Definitely was not.
It was a conference, though. It was technically a conference,
okay.
Right, Zach?
All right.
Yeah. How about I start us off, Mike, and then you take it from there. I'm just gonna. It was the date here is uncertain in my mind. I think it was December 2008. It may have been December 2009. Anyway, Jacksonville, where I lived, we were not married at the time, but my colleague Claire Riddell and I were hosting an investigations users conference. And we asked the team, it was Pearson at the time who published Investigations. We asked Pearson to get us an author to come speak. And the person who was in charge said, I'll one-up you. I'm going to get you a user and a teacher, the state teacher of the year from Massachusetts. His name's Mike Flynn. And they brought Mike Flynn down. Mike, you take it from there, because there's some other, like, the paths are wild after that. So.
Yeah, so it was exciting. This was my first like keynote out of state ever, and so when I got to site, I met Zach because he's the host, and Claire and everything. But Zach and I, like, right away we hit it off. Just like interest in music and teaching and outdoorsy kind of stuff. And so from there, I was thinking Zach would be a really good person to be part of this investigations training, and so I threw his name out to my boss for that group, and he was invited in. So then Zach was one of the trainers, and one of the things that you did when you were a trainer for this curriculum, the investigations curriculums, every March or so, there would be a retreat up in Maine.
Oh,
and we would all do math together and everything. So Zach was up, and we kind of knew each other enough, but we weren't like social media and phones. Like we weren't that tied in like we can be today. But again, we just kind of picked up where we left off and had a great time. But a whole group of us were kind of playing games down at a bar, and Zach and I kind of hung out afterwards and just started just talking about like our life, getting to know each other a little bit more. And it was pretty eerie, just like the parallels of just our life experiences and the ups and downs that we've kind of gone through in our life. And we realized, man, like really kind of scarily like parallel in a lot of ways. And I think that one of the things we talk about vulnerability is like there's a study in psychology that talks about closeness, and that and that you can create this in a learning space, but you can also just create this in personal relationships. And it has to do with reciprocal and escalating vulnerability. And that means when somebody shares something vulnerable and somebody else reciprocates by sharing an equally or even a greater vulnerable experience, that you become closer. So there's been lots of studies around like how that works. But that was something that like we had experienced, and we from then on we've just kind of been connected. So we would work together. We would, as you know, I moved on to the college, I brought Zach on as staff, and then we were at conferences together, and then we like developed ShadowCon together with Dan Meyer, and so we've always had things that we've worked on together. When I decided to leave the college and then start my own company, always thought like I believe so strongly in community and people and bringing lots of creative folks together. And it was a no-brainer for me to try to see if I could persuade Zach to join our team. And thankfully he did. So and now we're able to just continue to create and build. But again, community is such a central theme in what we do. So that's what we're trying to do, both with the collaborative, and we also recognize that not everyone's available for time for community. So what we do with the video production side is to try to recreate that communal experience as close as possible so that people don't feel isolated, they feel connected, and they feel like they're part of something.
That's beautiful. I mean, you said so much there that we could probably talk for another half hour, many hours about the idea of human connectiveness, and we need that so much now. And I just applaud both of you for this incredible work that you're doing, because I really believe that you're doing the work that teachers and the math education community at large needs right now. To see, we can say all we want about the effective teaching practices and about grappling math ideas and discourse and blah, 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 which all of those things are very important. And you're giving a real human way to make all that happen, even though you're not coming forward with those things right at the front, if that makes any sense. I mean, there's so much. So I thank you for doing that work. Not that I have any authority to thank you for on behalf of the math community, math ed. Yeah. Great. So so I actually attended one of your math play dates, and what I loved about it was like I didn't figure out the answer to the question, and I can honestly tell you that there were moments in that math play date where I felt like, oh my gosh, I should know how to solve this problem. But then I reminded myself, that's the whole point, right? That's the whole point. It's okay to not know. So when I sat in this math playdate, I thought, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. But it was so helpful then to take a step back and listen to somebody else's thinking. And I again think that this is so important for teachers to know that it's okay.
Yeah. And Pam, that's the thing we ask third graders to do every day, is to come in and try a problem they don't know how to do and share their vulnerable thinking. And like, we have a hard time doing it once a month. I say me as well. It can be really hard to be in that space. And like, I think last time I was on, I thought I'd bring that up again, Mike. This is my second time being on. Last time I was on, we talked about uncertainty and modeling uncertainty. I think that's so important that we show young people that it's okay to be uncertain. It's okay to not know the answer. And not only experiencing that on our own, but then when we're back in the classroom, modeling that for our young people is so important.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you both. So if the listeners are curious to learn more about all of the work that you're doing, where should I direct them to? I'll put it in the show notes, but where should they find you guys?
Zach, you want to do the rundown?
Sure. Well, you can find everything you want to know about Flynn Education at flynneducation.com.
Okay.
From there, if you want to know more about the collaborative, you can click on the Friends of Flynn Education tab. That'll take you to information about how to join if you'd like. There is a 14-day free trial, no credit card required. It's not going to automatically charge you if you don't forget to cancel your trial. So go ahead and hop in, do a 14-day free trial if you like. Check us out. If you do choose to do that, my encouragement would be to start at the beginning of a month so that you'll get access to a number of events and not sort of, sometimes at the end of the month, you might have a week or so where we don't have anything going on. We want to make sure you get your bang for the buck there. Mike and I are on all the socials. I'm Zach Champ at everything except for Instagram. Instagram is Zach Champ Math, and that's ZAKCHAMP and then MATH. Mike, I'll let you throw your socials out there. You can find us there too as well.
Yeah, and I'm Mike Flynn, 55. I have to throw numbers on mine because Mike Flynn is a common name. So there's a bazillion of us, and I'm not the guy associated with Russia, but I will always wake up sometimes with, I have 700 notifications. It's like, all right, well, what's he done now? Because everyone thinks I'm him. I get all sorts of DMs and everything. No, so the 55 is the math Mike, not the the other ones. But yeah, check us out on any of the socials, and then of course at any conferences and things. Zach and I usually show up at a lot of the NCTM, NCSM stuff, CMC South, and yeah, and we would love to have folks come and join. I mean, I love the fact that we can do the trial because it is a way for people just to see if this is something they'd like. But one other piece that we were really mindful of is professional learning should not have to break people's banks and things. And we know that right now, just with economic uncertainty and everything, people can get nervous about like school districts kind of pulling back on professional learning funds. And so we were looking at like we've got all these things kind of built out already. We love having the ability to like just have a community and everything. Everything that we do, it doesn't change if we have 30 people or 3,000 people. We get to do the same thing. So we found that we could just like make it really affordable. So for what people will get, like a full course and then these mini workshops and all these live PDs and then access to all the resources, it ends up being a really good bargain. And we've got nice people get on the site, and if school district may be interested, is we have a lot of incentives too, where districts like with bulk discounts and things. And then if you bring enough people, like we'll actually come and do free PD in your district too. So it's kind of nice because for us, it's about community. It's about like connecting people and giving them opportunities to like do a lot of math together and to just grow and learn and have a community, because that's what brought us together. That's why Zach and I are such close friends, but it's also why I'm where I am in the math world, why Zach is where he is because we had this community of math people that have, and actually many of them are part of the collaborative too, which is great because it's like once you bond around this work, you just kind of stay in it together. So we invite more people to join us.
Yeah, it's like band camp.
It really is.
You can't.
Yeah.
It's like band camp. And I can attest that I have a math ed community that I'm a part of. It's the Association of Math Teachers of New Jersey. Just can't tell you. It's how much fun. And we get one another, It's like, to get one another. It's really great. What's one quick piece of advice you might give an early career teacher who may be starting next year, even as the first year, who may have a little uncertainty about math?
Okay, so for early career teachers, I would say if especially if they have some uncertainty around math, the first thing I would say is like you're not alone. Like the fact I'll say I had so much uncertainty about math, and I'm now where I am. I would say I started my math journey, like my new math journey, at 26 years old. So that everything prior to that, it left me with some like anxiety and imposter syndrome, all of those things. And I had like no confidence whatsoever that engaging in professional learning with others and doing it, like relearning the math, is a process that is really empowering, and that it's okay not to know things, because when you don't know something, it's now a new thing that you can learn. And as you learn, you will start to notice that your confidence begins to go up. But it also, I find that teachers who have uncertainty about math tend to become some of the best math teachers, because you understand what it's like not to know. And so you have that lens and that empathy for your students who may feel that way. And I find that that's often the case. And so don't be afraid to learn alongside with your kids either. I learned so much from my second graders, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. A lot of what I know about math today, I learned from 7 and 8 year olds.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Mike, the first thing that came to my mind, shocker, we're on the same page here, was find your people. So I'll put that out there, but I'm going to also give one more piece of advice, which is give yourself grace and patience. This work is incredibly complex. It is so challenging. You're going to screw up far more often than you're going to succeed, and that's the nature of this work. So when those mistakes happen, be graceful with yourself. Know that you are doing incredible work. and be patient and trust the process, right? We'll come back to that theme, which is this, it's going to work, but you got to stick with it. And you got to know that you're engaging in some of the most incredibly complex work you can do. And so keep at it, stay with it, and trust, and give yourself grace.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both, Mike Flynn, Zach Champagne, for being here today on Blue Glasses Math. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Pam.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm Pam Brett. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Blue Glasses Math. Please follow me wherever you get your podcasts and follow along on the conversation on Instagram. And remember, being a math person is all just a matter of perspective.